this with elegant simplicity: one hot iron, one mark, lifetime of consequences. Branding irons were heated in courtyard fires until they glowed orange-red, then pressed firmly onto flesh for 5 full seconds. The smell burning skin mixed with rendered fat was unmistakable. The sound sizzling mixed with screaming carried across entire village squares. The mark was permanent. Third-degree burns that scarred into easily readable letters, announcing the woman's crime. Common brand locations included the forehead, impossible to hide, the shoulder visible when wearing peasant clothing, and the breast, targeting sexual organs for sexual crimes. Letters varied by region and crime: A for adulteress, T for thief, V for vagrant, W for witch. France branded women convicted of prostitution with fleur-de-lis symbols on both shoulders. England branded recidivist thieves on the thumb, and if caught again, amputated the branded thumb as proof of prior conviction. The brand served multiple functions simultaneously. It punished through pain, it marked for life, making employment difficult and marriage impossible for branded women. It warned others, this body bears official shame, and it transferred enforcement to society. Anyone could identify and ostracize the saying, branded woman, without consulting court records. Medieval branding anticipated modern criminal databases, using flesh instead of paper. Infection killed many within weeks, as third-degree burns became entry points for bacteria in an era without wound care. Those who survived carried the mark until death, unable to escape their past, even if they fled to distant towns. The brand traveled with them, announcing their history before they could speak. And when even permanent branding felt insufficient, when authorities wanted to destroy women's labor capacity entirely while teaching lessons about speech, they returned to the oldest punishment of all: public beating that displayed flesh being systematically destroyed. The whipping post required nothing sophisticated: a wooden pole sunk into village, square cobblestones, iron rings at shoulder height for wrist restraints. Strip the condemned woman naked from the waist up, bind her facing the post, and begin. The whip varied: simple leather, knotted cords, or multi-tailed scourges, but the principle remained constant: destroy the back until 24/3. Blood ran freely enough to satisfy observers that justice was served. Medieval municipal records detail whipping sentences with bureaucratic precision: 20 lashes for fornication outside marriage, 40 lashes for repeat theft, 60 lashes for blasphemy against church authority. Each number represented calculated tissue damage: 20 lashes removed skin, 40 exposed muscle, 60 risked permanent spinal injury. Women fainted during whipping, so executioners carried buckets of salt water to splash victims awake for the remaining strokes. The sentence was incomplete if the convicted didn't consciously feel every strike. Public whipping served multiple masters simultaneously. It punished the individual through pain. It warned observers through visual horror blood streaming down a woman's back made. Abstract law, concrete and terrifying. It entertained crowds who gathered to watch, bet on whether the victim would remain standing, and discuss her crimes in detail. And it satisfied male authorities' obsession with disciplining female bodies, particularly when the crime involved sexual transgression. Scars from whipping marked women for life. Raised keloid tissue across the back announced prior conviction to anyone who saw the woman bathing or changing clothes. Employment as a servant became impossible. No household wanted branded criminals. Marriage prospects vanished. The whipping post destroyed futures with measured efficiency, but at least whips were familiar pain. When interrogators wanted suffering that felt supernatural, they heated metal until it glowed, then brought it close to the most sensitive flesh imaginable. Red-hot tongs were blacksmith tools repurposed for theological enforcement. Heat iron pincers in a brazier until they radiate visible orange light, approximately 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Approach the bound woman. Apply the glowing metal to breasts, genitals, face, or any flesh the interrogator considered appropriate to the crime. The sizzle of burning tissue mixed with screaming created the soundtrack of medieval justice. Inquisition manuals described tong torture with clinical precision, specifying heating times and body locations for different heresies. Women accused of sexual relations with demons received tong application to genitals, the logic being that Satan's entry point required purification through fire. Accused witches had tongues gripped and held by glowing tongs for speaking demonic incantations. Women who refused to name accomplices felt heated iron clamp onto nipples, pulling and burning simultaneously until confession poured out. The genius of tong torture was its adjustability. Quick touches produced second-degree burns that blistered and scarred but healed within weeks. Sustained pressure created third-degree burns that destroyed nerve endings, producing permanent numbness and disfigurement. Extended application combined with pulling could tear away entire sections of breast tissue, creating wounds that guaranteed fatal infection in the pre-antibiotic era. St. Agatha's martyrdom specifically described breast mutilation with heated tongs, and medieval torturers treated her story as instruction manual rather than cautionary tale. They replicated her suffering on thousands of women, calling it holy work. The tongs left distinctive scarring, circular burn patterns with radial tissue, damage that marked survivors as convicted heretics even after completing their sentences. But tongs required individual application, limiting efficiency. When interrogators wanted to burn multiple body areas simultaneously, they developed a device that sprinkled molten metal like holy water blessing a congregation. The lead sprinkler looked almost liturgical, a metal bulb with perforated holes, resembling the aspergillum priests used for blessing ceremonies. But instead of holy water, this vessel held molten lead, boiling oil, or heated pitch. Swing it over a bound woman, and droplets sprayed across naked flesh, each contact point, creating instant third-degree burns. The device's brilliance lay in its coverage. A single swing could burn dozens of spots simultaneously: face, breasts, stomach, thighs, creating a constellation of agony that overwhelmed the victim's ability to process pain. Interrogators worked methodically, asking questions between swings. Silence brought another spray of molten metal. Answers deemed insufficient brought 2 sprays. Confession brought cessation, though infection from the burns often killed within days anyway. German torture chambers from the 1600s inventoried lead sprinklers alongside more conventional tools, suggesting regular use rather than exceptional punishment. The portability mattered. Unlike fixed devices such as the rack or wheel, a sprinkler could be carried into any cell, any dungeon, any private chamber where screaming wouldn't disturb neighbors. This enabled aristocrats to torture their own servants and wives without public oversight. Molten lead at roughly 620 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't just burn, it adheres to flesh as it cools, requiring surgical removal that itself causes additional tissue damage. Women who survived sprinkler torture bore permanent scarring across their bodies, patterns of circular burns that announced their criminal history to anyone who saw them, unclothed. The marks destroyed marriage prospects, employment opportunities, and social standing. The sprinkler turned skin into a permanent criminal record written in scar tissue. But at least torture devices acknowledged they were punishment. One device masqueraded as protection while actually serving identical control functions, and its mythology reveals how societies lie to themselves about female oppression. The iron chastity belt exists primarily in Victorian imagination, Yet its mythology reveals medieval reality with uncomfortable clarity. Museums display elaborate metal underwear, supposedly locked onto crusaders' wives to prevent adultery during years-long military campaigns. Most of these devices date to the 1800s, created during an era obsessed with medieval brutality. But the fake device points to real obsession, controlling female sexuality through any dollars, means necessary, including genital hardware. Actual medieval control operated through law, not locks. Women accused of adultery faced public whipping, branding, forced parading through streets, while crowds threw waste, and sometimes execution depending on social class. The threat alone enforced compliance more efficiently than any physical barrier. Why risk infidelity when conviction meant your face branded with A for adulteress, marking you unemployable and unmarriageable for life? The chastity belt myth persists because it literalizes what medieval law accomplished metaphorically, turning female genitals into property that men could lock away, whether through iron or through legal terror. The result was identical women's bodies controlled by male authority, their sexuality policed through fear of brutal consequences. The belt story can be Victorian fiction, while the violence it represents remains historical fact. And this reveals the pattern threading through every device we've examined. Torture wasn't about extracting truth. It was about displaying power, breaking resistance, and teaching entire populations that certain bodies, female, enslaved, poor, foreign, existed as legitimate targets for unlimited violence. Courts called it justice. Churches called it godly correction. And when those institutions wanted maximum visibility for their lessons, they didn't hide women in dungeons. They marched them through public streets, transforming entire cities into execution chambers where every passerby became witness, judge, and potential participant in the destruction of a human being. Forced parading was the punishment that required no device at all, just a woman's body and a street filled with people eager to enforce morality through violence. Courts sentenced women to walk prescribed routes through town centers, often partially naked or wearing signs announcing their crimes. The walk itself was the execution, slow and participatory. A woman convicted of adultery might be stripped to the waist, her hair shorn, face smeared with pig's blood, forced to march from the courthouse to the town square while crowds gathered. No guards protected her. That was the point. Citizens threw rotten vegetables, animal waste, stones. Men groped exposed breasts, calling it righteous punishment. Women spat and screamed insults, demonstrating their own virtue through contrast. Children learned to recognize criminal bodies and treat them as targets. The parade's genius was its efficiency. It required no infrastructure, no specialized executioner, no expensive materials. Just announce the route and let human cruelty do the work. Women sometimes died during parades, beaten to death by mobs, or succumbing later to injuries sustained during the march. Others survived physically but faced permanent social death. Once the entire town witnessed your shame walk, finding employment, shelter, or community became impossible. Medieval records describe parade punishments for prostitution, adultery, witchcraft accusations, speaking against husbands, refusing arranged marriages, and even gossiping about nobility. The crime list reveals the truth. Parades punished women for any assertion of autonomy over their own bodies or voices. The street became courtroom, the crowd became jury and executioner, and the woman's destroyed reputation became the sentence she served for the rest of her life. These 20 devices, from impalement stakes to public parades, share a common thread. They transformed female bodies into teaching tools, using pain, humiliation, and permanent marking to enforce rules about sex, speech, and obedience. Medieval Europe called this justice. We should call it what it was: systematic terror designed to control half the population through the spectacle of destroying individual women. If this history shook you, don't let it disappear into algorithm obscurity. Subscribe to Medieval Survival right now. Hit that like button and share this with someone who thinks the past was simpler or more moral than today. The comment section below is yours. Tell me which device horrified you most, or share historical details I missed. More dark medieval truth drops every week, and the next video goes even deeper into the machinery of historical oppression. The past wasn't romantic. It was brutal, calculated, and designed to make you grateful you weren't born female in the wrong century.